Jim, we're live now. Sorry for interrupting you, Mr. Mayor, but I am on the 117th edition of Sports Untold podcast, also on Rainier Avenue Radio. This is the host, Paul Schneiderman. My producer today is Lucius Tenebris. My special guest today is the mayor of Federal Way, Washington, former University of Washington football player, and candidate now to be the elected King County Prosecutor in the 2022 election season, Jim Farrell. We're on Facebook Live today. The podcast will also be in audio format. I encourage people to submit some questions for Mayor Farrell today. Jim, I'm going to get back to you in a minute. My podcast is also on YouTube, Amazon, Google, iTunes, Podbean. You can go to sportsuntoldpodcast.com. I encourage my listeners to click the like button regarding my show, comment, and go to sportsuntoldpodcast.com. Of course, only positive comments. Anyhow, though, all feedback's welcome. As mentioned, Jim played football at the University of Washington in the 1980s. He's a recipient of the Brian Statt Memorial Award for the most inspirational non-letterman. Jim Farrell earned the 88 Bob Jarvis Award for the most inspirational walk-on player. He also was chosen by his teammates to win the prestigious Guy Flaherty Award for the team's most inspirational player. And this is very fascinating because Jim was mostly a scout team player and he got an amazing honor with his teammates. Jim, I want to share with you on a personal note, I've had a whole bunch of Husky football players on my show, former players that you know, Greg Lewis, Mark Pattison, Jimmy Rogers, Steve Pallure, the list goes on. And it's just so much fun to talk to UW football players. On a personal note, my late grandfather, Harry Schneiderman, is a 1928 letterman. So I get a little sentimental with UW football players. So I never played, but beyond Little League, but guys like you, I think of my grandfather a lot when I interview Husky players. As I mentioned, Jim is currently the mayor of Federal Way, Washington, the 9th largest city in the state of Washington. Jim previously worked as a deputy and senior prosecutor in King County, where he was in the front lines working on all sorts of criminal cases at trial. He was very active in the courtroom scene. Jim is now a candidate, as I mentioned, to be elected King County Prosecutor. Primary will be in August, general election will be in November. We're definitely going to get into some sports today, but Jim, I can't help it. I'm going to talk some law and politics too. And Jim, I really appreciate you coming on Sports Untold today, also on Rainier Avenue Radio.
Oh, thank you for having me, Paul. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun today. Jim, you know, I think I had heard these stories years ago, and a colleague reminded me of them the other day. And did you really one time save one of your King County prosecuting attorney colleagues by doing CPR? And did you really chase a criminal defendant who ran outside of a courtroom? Are those stories true? Are you like an action like this?
Okay. First about the heart attack. Yes, what happened, actually, it was a defense attorney. It was December 28th. It was a Monday after Christmas, back in 1998. And I was in court with a fellow defense attorney, and we were in the presiding courtroom, and it was first thing in the morning, a morning matter, and we're in that, that glass partition area, and a fellow defense attorney, we're there on a case, all of a sudden went into cardiac arrest and was on the floor, and they first brought in somebody who was there for an arraignment, this young woman who was there to be charged with something. And they thought that she knew how to do CPR, but it was apparent after a few moments that she didn't. So I finally had to take off my jacket, and before I knew it, I was mouth to mouth and giving face to face, giving a CPR to my fellow attorney, who I had known quite well. And that was one of those moments where when I was doing it, I thought, this is not how I thought the morning was going to go. And I can tell you, it was a surreal experience. The medics came in, and he survived. I received an award from the sheriff at the time. Now, the second time was in 2003. I was at the Regional Justice Center. I was supervising a new prosecutor at the time, and I was in a suit. I was in wingtips, and we were downstairs, and I was actually there for a homicide case, and we were watching a calendar go on, before us, and they were going to take somebody into custody for violating a no contact order. I won't get too far into the weeds here, but as they were taking him into custody for violations, and I was looking at, I always taught my deputies to have situational awareness. Does the defendant have a pen in their hand or a pencil? Are they going to run for the door? Just to be aware of your surroundings. I wasn't even there for that case. And I looked at this guy and I thought, he's going to bolt. And sure enough, he did. And I don't know what I was thinking, but there was something so sort of outrageous about what he did. I just followed him. And I ran up the stairs. This is at the RJC. It's like a little state capitol. And he ran across the rotunda, and the guards kind of followed him at first. And then they thought, And then he ran across the street, across 4th, and then over by the Bank of America. I'm still chasing him. I'm in hot pursuit. And so I get over to the Bank of America, and I'm starting to think, is this a good idea? And then all of a sudden, everybody in line at the ATM said, he's over there. And he was behind a power transformer. So I stopped traffic, across the street. Paul, I have no idea what I was thinking. No cops. I'm not a cop. So I finally just go, hey, buddy, let's go. Let's go back to the court. You're already in trouble. Let's go back. And he comes up to me like he's going to hit me. And he kind of gets in what they call a bladed stance.
Right.
And he kind of and I'm like, dude, you don't need that kind of trouble. Just come with me. He goes, who are you? And I'm like, just come with me, buddy. Let's go. So finally, he turns around and runs the other way. And he had actually tried to get in the bed of a pickup truck. And that guy, it was a brand new pickup truck, and he didn't appreciate that. So the guy had pulled around and almost ran him over. His name was, we don't need to get in names. But anyway, he basically got in front of this guy, and the guy, slapped the hood of the truck and then kept running. So I told this guy, this guy driving the truck, I'm like, give me your cell phone. So I get on the cell phone with him, and now I'm running with the cell phone. And so anyway, he goes in, he pops through Meeker, and I didn't know it at the time. So I popped through the Meeker, and I'm looking around. I'm like, there's the Kent Diner. He's probably not there. I looked around, and there's just like this little antique gift shop that all these little glass, vestibules and shelves. And I went in there, and the two little ladies that were there goes, he's in the back, and there's no back door. So he comes running back out. I'm between him and the doorway at this point, and I very undiplomatically told him to get down on the floor. Now, when it's told, and he did. So next thing you know, I saw these Kent police officers sort of skid up, and they put him in cuffs, and they threw him into the back of the car. And so they shut down Meeker. And at one point, a Kent police officer says, hey, he wants to talk to you. And I'm like, tell him he can talk to me in court. We're going to take him back there. So that's the story.
Was he charged in the escape type of crime, anything like that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I handled that.
Well, Jim, move over, Superman or Spider-Man. We're going to call you Hero Man. I think we're going to get something going here, so that it's anyhow. Well, Joe, it's fun for you to go into a little more details on those two stories. They're kind of legendary stories around the legal community. Jim, you're currently the mayor of Federal Way, Washington. As I mentioned in the introduction, it's the 9th largest city in the state of Washington. What's going on in Federal Way these days? Why don't you share with us what you do as mayor daily, and a little bit what's going on?
Well, yeah, I led the effort to create the elected mayor form of government about 12 years ago, because I really felt like there was a lot of things that needed to happen in regard to our downtown. Our downtown had lost, the movie theater, the Toys R Us. There was a really sort of an exodus of businesses in our downtown core. And not the joke, but the frequent refrain is, where is downtown Federal Way? So I led the effort, and I got elected in 2013, and I've been mayor since 2014 now, to really help create a sense of center and bring in businesses. So since that time, we created Town Square Park, a beautiful 4-acre site with money we already had sitting in the bank. We didn't spend any extra money. We built a performing arts and events center, a $30 million facility that's 90% paid off. Then we punched in where there was a 30-foot wall between where Town Square Park was and where the old Toys R Us, which is now the Performing Arts and Events Center. And we punched where there once was a wall, now there's a 300-foot long, beautiful staircase. We're bringing in light rail it was going to go down Pack Highway, and we had put $100 million in regard to investments up and down Pack Highway over the course of 20 years. I said, no. You can't put it down Pack Highway. What you've got to do is bring it down alongside the freeway, and then bring it right into downtown, right next to the existing place. And so that's going to happen in 2 short years. So that's where we've been recruiting businesses, and the mall is redeveloping, and we got an Amazon right there with the building formerly known as Sears, and we've got a Dick's Drive-In coming in right next door to that. So a lot of stuff happening.
Stuff going federal way. And why do you want to leave as federal way mayor and become the King County prosecutor?
My wife had the same question. She's like, God, Jim, you love this job. Are you really sure? And I can tell you this, I have become really concerned about as we all have been, about the safety of this county. And while I worked in the prosecutor's office previously, I just think the prosecutor's office is just going in the wrong direction. And there's a real serious problem that I think people in the community are unaware of, that there are 5,000 unfiled felony cases at the King County Prosecutor's Office. 230 of those are homicide cases that are sitting in a drawer. 500 of those are sexual assault cases. So there's just there's been a real break with the cities. If you take a look at my website at jimferrell.org, you'll see dozens and dozens of mayors and police officer guilds that are supporting me. And my opponent's the current chief of staff. The current prosecutor has decided not to run for re-election. And I think if you take a look at those endorsements, that really represents a real schism and a break between the people that should be represented and that are not. And I think they want change. They want people held accountable.
So you enjoy your job as mayor, you just want to maybe try a different office. So try it.
Yeah, I really feel like I'm not sure. I think that things have gotten so serious that I felt like I needed to do this for my city and for all the cities, that I really felt a sense of obligation, because I think we're just going in the wrong direction. They've launched some things that without any notice to the cities, without any input to the cities. And I think they're going in the wrong direction. It'll really have a detrimental effect on the safety of the region. We actually got together with the current prosecutor and his leadership several times, and just not only are they doubling down on some of these diversion programs that aren't diversion, they're just a referral to private groups with no check back. They're going to start implementing that with adults, and I just think that's just wrongheaded.
Jim, you sort of answered this question, but I'm going to ask it sort of in a different way. If you win and become the elected King County prosecutor, you will join the likes of Chuck Carroll, Chris Bailey, Norm Mailing, Dan Satterberg, and all these prosecutors. I mean, of course, prosecutors before Chuck Carroll; those were before our times. Kind of leave their legacies as King County prosecutor. Jim, if you win and become the King County prosecutor, how do you want historians to look back at the Jim Ferrell years after you leave that office? What do you want your legacy to be?
Firm but fair. I think if I were going to sum it up, I mean, what I loved about working for Norm, who is just a legendary prosecutor, hired me back in '98, is that I really feel like I'm running a restoration campaign. This office, the prosecutor's office, has a storied and renowned background. It doesn't now, regionally but nationally. It was really one of the leaders in regard to the creation of a specialized special assault unit, the drug court, those kinds of things. And so I think that we need to restore the office as a leader. The King County prosecutor, you should be, the voice needs to be heard in Olympia when reforms are being, discussed and debated. And so I really think that I think that my legacy, that I would hope that people would believe, that I really want to make sure I have the very first thing I put on my website was, I believe in second chances. And I think, having had hundreds of jury trials, I know that people do as well. And I believe in second chances, but not revolving doors where the same people are committing the crimes over and over and over. And you need to be focused on justice and transparency and accountability. And I think that ultimately, the current trend, whether it's progressive prosecutors in Philadelphia, Chicago, no longer in San Francisco, but also Los Angeles with Gascon, there are needed reforms. On the other hand, though, it's a balancing act, and you need to make sure that people deserve to be safe and to feel safe. And so I think that people will say that under my administration, we course corrected, and that we've achieved a balance about helping people and getting people back on track, but also holding them accountable. And you're not doing offenders any favor by looking the other way either. They're not living their best lives, and they're disconnected from their families and their community. And so it's about helping them too, and treating them with dignity and respect, but firmly.
Paul Schneiderman, host of the Sports Untold podcast, also on Rainier Avenue Radio on the 117th edition with former UW football player and candidate for King County Prosecutor Jim Farrell. I encourage listeners to like, comment, subscribe, and go to sportsuntouldpodcast.com. Happy to take some questions from the audience today for Jim. Jim, Governor Inslee, back in about 2014, issued a moratorium on death penalty cases. And the Washington Supreme Court later in 2018 ruled the death penalty is unconstitutional as applied under Washington state law. However, the state Supreme Court did not rule out the possibility that the state legislature could enact a new death penalty statute in the future. If the death penalty becomes legal again in Washington state, Jim, how do we handle death penalty decisions as King County Prosecutor?
Well, I do think that there are circumstances, with the Green River Killer, in my opinion, should have received the death penalty. I think when the individual who, shot and killed 4 police officers, I think that there are the rare times in the criminal justice system in which that's necessary. And when you have, those type of egregiously, there was the Carnation case where multiple people were murdered. And so, where those aggravating circumstances exist, where you just get the Green River Killer killed over 40 women. And I really think that we need to probably go back and have the law be able to address those rare instances in which it's necessary. But I do think it is.
So you disagree with Governor Inslee's decision in 2014 to issue a moratorium on all capital punishment cases?
I do.
Jim, this doesn't come up as much in conversations about prosecutors' offices and district attorneys' offices around the country. We hear a lot of attention, which is of course necessary, about the criminal division of these offices, but many prosecutors' offices, including King County, also have a civil division where many important cases can be decided. For the listeners, civil cases are non-criminal cases that can involve issues over property or injuries, matters like that. Can you tell us a little bit about the civil division of the King County Prosecutor's Office? And what do you have in mind as you, if you get elected and run the civil division of the Prosecutor's Office as well?
Well, thank you. I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, there's in the prosecutor's office, there's the criminal division and there's the civil division. I think it's critically important that we always keep in mind who the client is. The client is not the government. The client is the people that we represent. And I think that has to be, whether it's a land use issue, whether it's a tort, I think, a personal injury case, those kinds of things, you always need to keep in mind, who we're working for. And obviously you want to make sure, one of the things I was always impressed by is the level of legal talent, and really people that could be making a lot more money in the private sector, but they want to do public service. So I know that, the feedback that I've heard is that there's a lot of contracting out to private firms, either for litigation or for other type of matters. And then that really, that like who your actual client is really gets lost in translation, in which there are, number one, you're accumulating cost because you're contracting out. That shouldn't be done. We've got a stable of lawyers ready and competent to be able to handle those, but also to keep in mind who we're working for, and making sure that if it's a property rights issue, whether it's a land use issue, that we don't engage in what's referred in, as in certain cases, sharp practices, or representing the county. You have a tremendous amount of power. I think actually that's in the criminal division and the civil division. We always need to remember that prosecutors wield a tremendous amount of authority, and it should be used sparingly and judiciously, and with and compassionately. So that's where I think we need to really and watch the pocketbooks as well, making sure that we're doing things in a financially and fiscally sound manner.
If you are elected prosecutor, do you welcome dialogue with the plaintiffs' personal injury bar? Do you welcome having?
Of course. Well, I actually represented them in Olympia in 1995. I was actually first I worked for the state medicals right after law school. Paul, what it's like when you get done with law school. I worked for state medical at first, and then my job right after that, and I'd worked in Olympia for a couple of sessions in the state Senate. And then I actually lobbied with the Washington State trial lawyers in the 1995 legislative session. So yeah, they're old friends. In fact, I still go to some of their CLEs because that actually really helped me when when all the jury trials that I had. I would always go to this CLE called Trial by the Masters, and Luvera and Kessler and all those great trial attorneys, and really and so I learned a lot actually. That I have certain things that I do when I'm picking a jury. Do I sound like I'm still prosecuting? Certain things that I do that really help. And you know what it was? Is that, Paul, it's all about trust. And it's all about letting people know you care about them, you respect them, you treat the jurors and everybody with respect. And and all of those jury trials, even sometimes the strongest cases I had, when I would talk to the jurors afterwards, they would always tell me it was about, that it did come down to trust. Did they trust the witness? Did they trust me? And that's really what it's about.
Yeah, we're going to get to your football career in a minute. This is a sports-based show, but we hit on some other issues on Sports Untold. And I real quickly, I believe you were a White House intern for the first President Bush at one time. Can you share a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, and I won't get, as you can tell, I can tell a story here and there, and I can go on for a while.
Fun stories.
I got that job as an intern because of a tie-dye T-shirt. I was in Atlanta. Do you remember back in the early 90s when Dan Quayle showed up to the National Bar Association, the ABA, the American Bar Association, and said there were too many lawyers in America? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I was in Atlanta running for national office with the American Bar Association Law Student Division. Every law school in the country was there. I met this great guy from Jackson, Mississippi School of Law. He was really a fun guy, and he had this really thick Southern accent like my dad did. And we became fast friends, and he had interned. Well, I didn't know it at the time. So we hung out in Atlanta when I was running, and I lost that race, came back 3 months later and won another one. And so I was like the secretary treasurer of the ABA Law Student Division for a year and a half. And so anyway, I was at Gonzaga, I go back to Spokane. But during that conference we were hanging out, I went for a run. I don't know what I was thinking in the middle of August in Atlanta, about passed out. And when I went back to the hotel, David wasn't in his traditional Southern seersucker suit. He was in a tie-dye T-shirt, had a peace symbol on it, and it said Mississippi College of Law, and on the back it said "Make Love, Not Law Review." And I'm like, at the time I was a conservative young guy, and I'm like, oh my God, I've got to have that T-shirt. So he says, oh, I'll send it to you. And so a couple months go by, I'm back at Gonzaga, and no T-shirt. So I call up David, and I'm like, David, hey, dude, you gonna send me my T-shirt? Because I was in intramural basketball, and I figured people would think it'd be funny for me as this young Republican to have this tie-dye T-shirt,
right,
with the peace symbol on it. And he said in his thickest Southern drawl, "I'm sorry, James, I haven't been able to get you that." He says, "I'm off to see the president this week, but I'll get it to you when I get back." So there's a long pause on the call. And I'm like, "The president of what?" And he goes, "Oh, I didn't tell you. When I was an undergrad at LSU, I interned for the vice president, George Herbert Walker Bush." And make a long story short, well, sort of, he hand-delivered my application, and a couple of interviews later and some referrals by some U.S. senators, I find myself sitting in the second floor of the ceremonial office of the Vice President of the United States. I worked for free for 4 months.
Wow.
But I had all the Diet Coke I could drink every day, and it was a surreal experience.
Did you get to know President Bush at all?
I met him on two separate occasions. I was there when Boris Yeltsin visited the White House, and and so we were on the ellipse or on the South Lawn there, and I was in another room with him. But I spent most of my time with the vice president at the time, and that was a fascinating experience. My first day was the Murphy Brown speech. I worked in the chief of staff's office and the legal counsel's office, but the chief of staff was a man named Bill Kristol, and he was sort of a domestic Henry Kissinger.
Right.
He'd worked in
follow him on Twitter, Bill Kristol.
Yeah, he's great. So I worked with him, learned a lot from him. His father was the founder of the neocon movement. It was interesting. It was fascinating. It was surreal. Oftentimes I'd find myself in meetings and I'd be like, how did I get here? It was fascinating.
What a great source. We're going to get to sports in a couple minutes, but I did get a question from the audience here that I'm going to ask you. Bruce Bush, who I know, another Roosevelt guy, he's an attorney. Bruce has a question for you. As a prosecutor, are there any laws you would choose not to prosecute, such as in the event of a national ban on abortion, if a national ban on abortion was imposed? I believe that's Bruce's question.
Yeah, I really, I think that is it's really just let me say, first of all, I want to say, I support a woman's right to choose. I'm pro-choice. I would also say that even though it's a nonpartisan race, I am a Democrat. But I think the office is nonpartisan for a reason. I am pro-choice. I do not think that we should be prosecuting people for seeking something that I believe is a constitutional right. It's really the first time in history that we've seen a rollback from something that has been considered a constitutional right, first established in Griswold with the right to privacy, and now extended under Roe. And I think it's this country is already so divided. I think it makes me sad that we're just that this division is there. I don't think there's any chance of Washington State, outlawing abortion because the people of the state voted for it previously. But I would not prosecute people for that. I wouldn't do that.
I'm going to get one more question that I have for you. If you're elected King County Prosecutor, Jim, I worked downtown for over 20 years. I grew up spending a lot of time downtown. My father and grandfathers worked downtown. I like cities. I like downtowns. I still go downtown, and sometimes I go to the King County Law Library. I'm a little old school. I still go in there sometimes and get books.
Me too.
But I'll tell you, Jim, though, there's a lot of safety issues right now on 3rd and 4th Avenue by the courthouse, on 3rd and James area. People have been assaulted. Many folks in the community just don't want to go down there. Jim, if you become the elected King County Prosecutor, do you have any special steps in mind that will add further protections in that courthouse area? Because a lot of people are scared to go inside the courthouse right now and exit it.
Well, it's truly outrageous. I worked in that building. I love that building. I love the old pictures of Seattle, and you've seen the old pictures of the courthouse, and people have an absolute right to be able to go into their public buildings. Number one, to go to work, to go to jury service, to show up. We've got the King County Council on the top floor of that building. We've got we've got jail facilities up there. We've got courtrooms where justice is occurring and in process. So I appreciate the fact that several of our King County Superior Court judges have been absolutely, the current presiding judge and several other judges have been insisting and demanding safety. I know our King County Council member here, Pete von Reichbauer, has demanded that. Our King County Prosecutor has been just absent, as just in regard to safety at the courthouse. And I think this position really needs to be a leader and demand that employees, jurors, and people that come to do business on behalf of the community be able to do so in a safe manner. And it's not rocket science. They just need to deploy more resources down there. Work with a fellow former Husky, Bruce Harrell, Mayor Harrell, to make sure that that's there, but also the King County Sheriff's Office, and make sure that people can come and go safely.
So if you're elected prosecutor, you'll be proactively involved in the courthouse safety issues.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's absolutely essential that occur. We need to be vocal about it. We need to lead.
Jim, I'm going to move to sports now. We could talk law and politics forever, but I may have one or two more questions. But let me tell the story of how you became a UW walk-on player. How did the whole experience emerge, Jim?
Well, I grew up in Yelm, Washington. The tallest building in town was the Water Tower. And it was a AA. So we were in the Black Hills League. We played Capital, Olympia, North Thurston, Aberdeen, Hoquiam, Shelton, Timberline, Tumwater. That was I'm sure I forgot. Oh, North Thurston. It was a good league, right? It was a competitive league. And some of the folks that I played with in some of those schools went on to play college football. I made the decision that I wanted to play football at the University of Washington as a walk-on. I knew that there was a great walk-on program. My plan was to do essentially what the Texas A&M did, which is, they had their long before we had our 12th man, they had their walk-on program called the 12th man. And my idea was to, get on a kickoff team cause a few wrecks and get Don James to put me on the kickoff team. And it was a tremendous experience. It was very daunting. We played, case in point, I played in a grass field. We would play Elma. That was probably, and the bow in the field in my senior year, you could barely see the tops of the heads of the other players. So that gives you an idea of where I came from. So walking on to the Husky Stadium the first few times was daunting. My first game as being on the field was the 1985 Ice Bowl game, where Chris Chandler marched the field down from the 10-yard line against SC, and scored the touchdown and won the game. So, but my thought as a walk-on coming through the tunnel and there's snow on the ground is, dear God, don't slip on the ice as you're going through the tunnel and up on the ramp. But it is one of those surreal experiences going down that tunnel with the chance and just that angry dog pack bursting onto the field. And it was really a tremendous experience. And Coach James was, awesome.
Big deal for a young kid to play in Husky Stadium. Paul Scheinman, host of the Sports Untold podcast, the 117th edition, also on Rainier Avenue Radio with Jim Ferrell. I encourage people to feel free to ask some questions and to Jim. Jim, you mentioned Chris Chandler. I actually had a question involving Chris Chandler. Would you say he was the most, impactful player you play with his long NFL career? Would you put Chandler in that? Of course, Greg Lewis too, who I know well. I mean, who's the most impactful Husky player you play with? Chandler, Lewis, throw.
That's a good question. I was contemporaries with Greg, and also, I was Chris was a few years ahead of me, and he was a great leader, and he did have a long NFL career. There were so many great guys. Who doesn't get enough attention is Martin Harrison out of Newport High School. He played with the Vikings. He played with the 49ers. Dennis Brown. I remember when Dennis Brown was a senior in high school, and they brought him out. They brought him in early for spring ball and he started as a freshman. And as you all know, he went down to San Francisco and played well there. Lilo Lang, who started off, I love that, one of the greatest names in Husky football history, started as an option quarterback in South Central Los Angeles, and then they converted him to defensive back. He was a great ball player. I think he played at Denver. Kerry Conklin was there. Mark Brunell and I used to go to chapel together. He was a great quarterback. Who I really admired, and I haven't heard much about lately, but Bo Yates was probably the best linebacker, just form-wise, I'd ever seen. It was just perfection in motion. And I learned a lot from watching him. He started as a true freshman, number 3, just a true natural. So I think there were so many. David Rill, what always impressed me about David Rill was he would knock you on your back in a second. Great form, very quiet, very respectful, a great guy. So a lot of great guys I played with.
I suppose if we're looking at long-term NFL careers as part of the analysis of who is most impactful, Chandler and Brunell have to be up there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, what I really always, they were great leaders. They were good people. The walk-on locker room was down the hall. It's where the scale was. We had to get, not only did you have to get taped every morning or before practice, but you always had to get weighed in. And so the walk-on locker room is where the AstroTurf stops and the gray linoleum starts, and then there's the scale. And so for years I could guess a person's weight within a few pounds because my locker was where that huge line had been, and they would note everybody's weight every day. And I would do my homework, as I was, getting ready for practice, reading my books. And so, the Vince Lombardi quotes and the pictures and the mightier the men are purple and gold, they stopped at the walk-on locker room. And that was a great experience. Now, my last 2 years, I was in the varsity locker room, and that was awesome. And with Jim Clifford and the younger Hoffman, Dave Hoff, or the older Hoffman, excuse me, and a lot of those guys. Oh, Lincoln Kennedy. We didn't mention Lincoln Kennedy.
Right. Very impactful.
He was and I remember when I was sort of the head of the the junior varsity or the walk-on crew by my senior year. So you had Lincoln Kennedy, Hoffman, Clifford, all those guys, and they ended up being 5-year seniors, and so I got to kind of play right next to those guys. They were great.
Well, I learned so I never knew the walk-ons had a separate locker room at the University of Washington.
Oh yeah. Oh well, and then eventually, if you kind of earn your way into some depth and get knocked around enough, they bring you into the varsity locker room.
Jim, I've had, as I mentioned, I've had a lot of Husky players, former players on my show. It's not a UW only sports show by any chance, but being a UW guy, and UW's in my backyard here in Lesha, of course I'm going to have some Husky talk on my show. I've had Greg Lewis, Jimmy Rogers, Mark Pattison, yourself, and Don James has come up a lot on my show. Ed Cunningham, the list goes on of Husky players I've had on my show. And I'm going to ask you maybe a somewhat different question about Don James I have not asked before. Do you think he would have been a good NFL coach?
Oh, it's a great, I've thought a lot about that. He was such a great man. Well, let me just say this. Don James would have been successful at anything he tried. And you know what I learned from Don James? Attention to detail. And what I mean, and I learned so much about that. Couple things about Don James. If people haven't seen it, they need to get a hold of the book called The Thursday Speeches. The author is one of the original James Gang. It's all about the preparation that started on Thursday nights and the very almost erudite and very hopeful and visionary speeches that he would give. I give it as a gift to people, and in fact, I gave one to Mayor Ferrell right when he got elected because I don't think he had a copy. And I think those they are examples of speeches he gave during his entire time there. When one of the things that I noticed about the details, I learned this as a prosecutor, the details will kill you. And Don James, even during the time, before we got separated into our position drills, I'd go with the outside backers, and the kickers would be there. And Don James, Coach James, would keep track of the seconds and the fractions of seconds it took to snap the ball, to get it to the holder, and to get it. And he would keep track of that methodically. He was a student of the game, but he was a stickler for details and he was a real tactician. And I love the fact that he, as we all know, recall, he had the tower, the Bear Bryant Tower, it was his, but he would roll it out. Now, when he came out of that tower, there would be a problem. So like when we get a chance, I'll tell you about, something I did that got him out of the tower. But he ran the program, I think, methodically and thoughtfully and with a visionary influence. Now, the question, though, is ultimately, would that have translated into the professional, probably
Right.
Old school? He was a Chuck Knox, type of in a Vince Lombardi type coach that was tough. There was one time, I'll tell you a really funny story. We're getting ready to go to the Independence Bowl in '87. And there was some talk. The captains went to go see Coach James because that was, recall, if you will, that was before Christmas. It was one of the earlier bowl games. We played Tulane in the Independence Bowl. And a lot of people were studying for their finals, and the captains went down to Coach James's office, and they were talking about a general strike about the number of practices we were having in lead up. And it's told to me, this is hearsay, counsel, but it's told to me that Coach James got up during that, leaned over his desk and said, whoever's not on the field in the next 30 minutes is not going, period. And that was Don James. And I think, so the answer to your question is, he would have been legendary. He would have been detailed. He wouldn't have taken any garbage.
Had Skip Hall on as well. We talked about Don James. I got a little follow-up to you on that.
Yeah.
How would Don James have handled professional players with contracts and all that kind of stuff? Was he just more of a natural with college kids?
No, I do think that he was just like he would have been firm but fair. I think that he would have been he would have understood that it was a profession, but I think somewhere along the line we get into this touchy-feely business. He was old school in the old school sense. You remember Jack Patera? I mean, and things change over time. I loved Patera. He was willing to do different different things, and because he needed to, right, with the expansion teams. But I think that he was Coach James was a real student of the game, but I think he was always professional. He was always very, very professional. And I think that he would have established clear lines of communications. The key to him and success would be establishing respect and communication. And what he wouldn't have tolerated are some of the showboats that are in it for that were in it for themselves and not for the team. It was always about the team. And people like that can kill your program.
It's an interesting alternative history analysis of Don James, how he would have been as an NFL coach. And your input to that question is fascinating. Jim, you won the Guy, hope I'm pronouncing the last name correctly, Guy Flaherty Award. Yeah. And I want you to brag a little bit, Jim. Tell us how you won that award when you were primarily a scout player. Tell us what you did. I mean, it's a major UW football recognition award. Tell us how you got it.
Well, it was a surprise. I was deeply honored by it. It sits in my office right now, and I see it every day. Okay, I would say probably one of the most devastating things that ever happened to me in my life was the last padded practice of the 86 season. We're practicing for WSU for the Apple Cup. And on the Wednesday, which is Thursdays, we used to go light, no shoulder pads, it was kind of just what they sweats run through on a Thursday and lead up to the game. On the Wednesday, I was playing hard, and flying around, causing wrecks, tried to block a punt. And I was going all out, and I came up the middle, and somebody came up from the outside and ran right through my knee and immediately tore 3 ligaments. They rolled me off the field. I had surgery at Northwest Hospital within 48 hours. So I can tell you this. Number one, talk about leadership. Coach James, even though I was a walk-on from Yelm High, Coach James was there when I came out of surgery. I mean,
incredible.
Really
incredible.
Yeah, awesome. Right. And then, so I came back and I wrote him a letter after that. I said,
I love that story.
Yeah, thank you. And I wrote him a letter from that hospital bed, and I said, I'm coming back. And I played 2 more years. So they, I got to tell you a funny story. So they put me through rehab. So the summer of '87, I was in rehab, not only for my knee, but for my back. There were times in which before the knee injury, they'd have to invert me and put you on hooks so you can kind of stretch out your back. So I got my back worked on and my knee, but I would be on this orthotron doing 400 reps a day. And I was determined. And here was my thought, Paul. Not only did I really feel obligated to go back to play, I knew that if I didn't get back into top physical shape at this stage of my life, I probably never would. And I had I thought, this is probably the best shape I'm ever going to be in my life. Let's do it right now. So I came back, played in '87, went to the Independence Bowl, and then in '88. And but I'll tell you this, couple things. Coming back from that devastating knee injury was probably, I've graduated college, law school, been a member of the Rock. I am more proud of that than almost anything I've ever done in my life. And so I played 2 more years. And I think people, my colleagues on the team, they knew that when they lined up against me, I was going to give it everything I had, and I played tough. I probably averaged a fight, at least once a week or 2. At 190, 95 pounds, you gotta play like you mean it. And so I think that there was a mutual respect. I showed up every day. And
that was a younger Jim Farrell. You don't strike me as a guy with getting fights now, but that was a different Jim Farrell, wasn't it?
It was cathartic. I remember. There was something about it. I think there's something about putting on the helmet and having the pads and you know what it was is I really felt like it was my job to prepare the team for Saturdays. And I remember the way I met Tony. You remember Tony Covington, number 39? He was from Portland. He was the wingman on the PAT team. And so the way I met him my freshman year is I kept knocking him over and trying to get through. I wasn't phoning it in. I mean, I was there to play. And Tony, I remember, I was a true freshman, and he runs up to me, because you got your laundry bag every day, and you had these huge bobby pins in the net bags, and you throw everything in the laundry after practice. And he runs up to me and he goes, "Are you 88?" And I thought, Jesus, are we going to go right here? And I said, yeah, I'm Jim. And he goes, I'm Tony. And he goes, keep doing what you're doing. It's making me better. And that's why I did what I did.
Great compliment. Great compliment. Love those stories. Well, we've got another question. When Ferrell and Schneiderman talk, a few other attorneys are listening too here. Our friend George Shearson has a great question for you. George wants to know, Hugh McElhaney, the legend, just passed away. Should UW do something to honor him? Great question from George.
Oh, absolutely. I think you're talking about lasting impact. I think Hugh is probably the best Husky. It's a long list. I mean, with Warren Moon and all the players that came before, and it's a tremendously long list. But clearly, I think that. But I think you do need to be careful because there are quite a number of folks that have made lasting contributions. But yes, they need to do something.
Jim, you got 10, 15 more minutes?
Of course.
Great. Paul Schneiderman, again, host of Sports Untold, 117th edition Sports Untold podcast. Go to sportsuntouldpodcast.com, and my show is also on YouTube and some other outlets, Spotify and so forth. Jim, what advice do you give to a young Jim Farrell? I asked the same question to my prior guest, Noah Neubauer, who was a walk-on UW basketball player. Do you tell a young Jim Farrell, go to a small college and play a lot and probably get some playing time and have that experience? Or do you tell a young Jim Farrell, go walk on a D1 program and give it a run? What advice do you give to a young Jim Farrell?
It's a great question. I've thought a lot about that. Number one, I wouldn't tell him anything. What I would say is I wouldn't tell him what would happen in the future, other than follow your dreams, stick to your guts, stick to your principles, never quit. So I think, I think back, there's a moment, really probably the hinge point of my life, that occurred in Montlake parking lot. And it was the very first day that I walked on. And I'll never forget showing up to that parking lot, my royal blue 78 Chevy Nova, park in the Montlake parking lot. It was a walk-on meeting. It was a hot, blistering day in August of 1985. And I got out of my car and I started walking toward Husky Stadium with the stadium looming. And I'm like, I stopped about 20 feet after my car. And I'm like, what am I doing? What? This is not rooted in reality. What am I doing? And I turn around, I go back to my car. And I do that 3 times. So I think about that moment a lot, and it really dictated the course of my life. I think actually, not quitting, making the decision to do that which you believe is beyond your grasp. That's the difference in life. That's what I've tried to do every day of my life. And I think that decision to lock the car and go back and walk those 1,000 steps. In fact, actually, I'm working on a writing project right now called The 1,000 Steps. Because those 1,000 steps changed the course of my life.
Jim, another part of your life that I was reading about is you lost your father at a very young age. And I think your mom seemed like a really incredible woman raising you and your siblings. Tell us how that impacted you.
Yeah, I think it really helped me understand the struggles of working class people and people that didn't have a lot. We were originally raised in the Lakewood area. And then after my father passed away, my mother moved my twin brother and I out to Yelm. And so we were originally in Lakewood. I would have gone to Lakes High School had we stayed in Lakewood. But I think that I think our mother wanted to get us, into a nice home, into a nice, really sort of a good school district. It really gave me the confidence where, I played football, basketball, baseball, student government, and excelled in a lot of different things, and really gave me a firm basis and my mom did that. And I think that I became a prosecutor in large part because I wanted to help people. And I know that sounds interesting, but I think really helping victims, and helping even the people that are accused to get back on track. And so, but I've often found myself being very compassionate toward people, not only that are victims, but are charged, because I know that sometimes they've had life circumstances that have brought them to a place, and it's all about learning. And I think, I was in the program. Sometimes I think the most important thing that can happen to you are setbacks and challenges. they really the knee injury. I received that award because of the knee injury and my response to that, which was to come back, play 2 more years, and not let that defeat me. I think actually being there in 1988, my senior year was the year that the bowl game streak was broken. We didn't go to a bowl game my senior year in 88. And that was really fascinating. My first year in 85 was the post Orange Bowl year. We were so deep that the walk-ons could barely get in during rotations. Now, 3 years later in 1988, when we didn't go to a bowl game, there were so few walk-ons that there was barely anybody to come in to relieve me. And I think it taught me a lot about loyalty, really counts when a loyalty and perseverance and attitude matters, not when times are great, when you win national championships, but when you face adversity. And those are the best lessons I've ever learned.
Jim, these are 2 questions I've asked about every guest since late 2019. These are my 2 favorite questions. I'm going to put Mayor Farrell on the spot here. Who's a living sports figure? It can be a general manager, a player, an owner, someone who's still with us you love to interview or chat with, and who's a deceased sports figure in history that you would have loved to have interviewed or chatted with?
Oh God, that's great. The answer to the second question is Vince Lombardi. I think, and he was an individual that, what's interesting, if you look back in that 1958 New York Giants team, Landry coached the offense and Vince Lombardi coached the defense. Excuse me. It was the other way around. It was Lombardi coached the offense and Landry coached the defense. Think about that coaching tree from the 58 New York Giants. I also think that I think there was a great thing I learned or heard once from the legendary coach of the Raiders, John Madden, where he, right when he was getting started, he was a junior college coach. He thought he knew everything he needed to learn about football. And he went to hear Vince Lombardi talk about the sweep. And after 6 hours, he walked out of the room and realized, I don't know anything. And you know what it was? What's fascinating about the way that sweep worked for the Packers was that everybody knew it was coming. Here it comes. But it was just like a finely tuned watch. And he just dared people to stop him. And he was tough, but his players loved him. And I read a book by Jim Kramer, who was the legendary guard out of Idaho.
Right.
And he was really tough on Kramer. And I think that, but I think that that's really, he learned a lot from Coach Lombardi. And I think that that's really, it's the people that hold you to a higher standard and demand excellence.
So you picked Lombardi, great. Another guest answered Lombardi. Skip Hall answered Tom Landry that question with the see sports figure he loved to chat with.
Yeah.
I think Skip may have met him once, but he mentioned Landry. Who's a living sports figure that you'd love to chat with or interview?
Boy, that's great. This is going to surprise you, but the coach of the New England Patriots,
Belichick. His name's come up. Yeah.
And you know why? Because, here's my answer to that is a relentless pursuit of perfection. And I think ultimately I adopt a lot of from what I've heard from what he does, which I believe that I talk about first downs and he, and it's really, and I think about life in regard to first downs. It's like one thing after another, and you build. It's not about throwing the bomb. It's not about the exotic plays. It's about the game is about successive first downs and building and my life is like that. Yeah. And I think that's where he understood the mechanics of the game. And I think he's, he's a little taciturn. But he's also, from every other, he's a tremendous individual and a consummate professional.
And I'm sorry if there's a little drilling noise in the background right now. So
I can't hear it.
Oh, good. Okay. All right, Jim. Who is a legal figure, a living legal figure? It can be a private practice lawyer, attorney. It can be an attorney general, a U.S. Supreme Court justice that you love to chat with. But who's a deceased figure in the law you would have loved to have spent some time with and chat with?
Well, that's interesting. Gosh, that's a great question.
I think Louis Brandeis or Thurgood Marshall would have been fascinating to chat with.
Yeah. William Howard Taft. We share birthdays. He was born on September 15th. He occupied both the position of president and, I believe, Chief Justice. I think he would have been an interesting person.
There's also a podcast on Taft, coincidentally. So
yeah. So I think actually he would have been a very interesting individual, and really one of the a kind of a hinge point of history, his presidency. He's really one of the less noted, really only noted because of his weight, really. But you sort of, in between, Teddy and Wilson, TR and Wilson, and the times that he was navigating through. But, legal figure, he would have been interesting.
Taft was an interesting. And who's a living legal figure you love to chat with? It could be anyone, a private practice lawyer, Supreme Court justice, a current or prior attorney general, all sorts of names.
Gosh, that's a great question. Maybe, I was in an elevator once with Scalia. We were, when my wife and I were, so it's not Scalia, but my wife and I were in an elevator in New York, and he got on one floor beneath us, and I said good morning, and he goes, "Well, what's good about this morning?" So he was a funny guy. Yeah. So I would say maybe
I have to steal that line.
Yeah, exactly. He was funny, and I was just about to say, I was about ready to do those. We're Jim and Wendy from Washington State, and I opted not to bother him. Maybe the current chief. Maybe the current Chief Justice.
Yeah, John Roberts. Yeah. All right. I got about 3 more questions for you, Jim. Who's a deceased political figure in history you would love to have interviewed or chat with, and who's a living political figure you'd love to interview or chat with?
Teddy Roosevelt. I think a lot of people, there's a reason why, if you think about all that he accomplished and all that he did, he was a complicated person, frenetic, thoughtful, went against type. They put him on the vice presidency because the New York people didn't want to see him anymore. They figured that, political careers go to die in the vice presidency.
He was a big hunter too.
That's right. But one with honor as well. That's they didn't classically refused or, famously refused to shoot a tied up animal. He was a big hunter, but more importantly, he was a great thinker, and he accomplished a tremendous amount, but actually more so because he preserved the national parks. He was actually a true progressive, and really the progressive movement in regard to labor and food safety and the national parks, which was one of the greatest things America's ever produced. The Constitution, jazz music, and the national park system are some of the greatest things we've ever put out. So definitely TR. But here's the problem. With TR in the room, you couldn't get an edge in. You couldn't get a word in edgewise. So you just had to listen.
Right. I read some accounts about him being a strong personality. And who's a living political figure you'd love to interview, or whose brain you like to pick?
Henry Kissinger. Really the father of, not the father, but the architect of post-war, post-Vietnam. And frankly, actually, he did his doctoral dissertation on Metternich after the Congress of Vienna in 1815, and that's really, I think he fashioned himself a modern Metternich. So I've done a lot of reading on him. I think certainly I think he would be a fascinating person to sit down with, and especially the triangular diplomacy that he. And actually, there's a lot of scholarship that Nixon felt so much rivalry essentially with Kissinger, but he couldn't fire him. He was his only star. So I think that Kissinger would, and he was really the only one that survived, that horrible, the Watergate fiasco, a tragedy. For our country and what it put our country through. So I think he would be someone I would really, because not only did he have the perspective of growing up in his really early years in Germany, but the perspective of all that he accomplished in regard to Middle East peace and the peace in Vietnam eventually, and the current state of affairs.
almost 100 years old, Henry Kissinger. He definitely has his detractors, but he would be a fascinating guy to talk to. Well, this will probably be my final question, Jim. What a fun interview today. What's your favorite sports movie?
Oh, God. I go to Field of Dreams, but frankly, actually, but I can't answer this question without saying Rocky 2. Frankly, I got the idea to walk on Husky football watching that movie as a kid. That's when I realized I was going to walk on Husky football, was watching Rocky 2.
Jim, what a lot of fun. What a great hour. Thanks for hanging out a little longer today. Thanks for coming on Sports Untold. You and I will be in touch, and good luck in your race for King County Prosecutor and your continual duties as mayor of Federal Way and with your family and everything. And thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me, Paul. Appreciate it. Really enjoyed it. Great questions.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. We'll be in touch.
All right. Take care. Thanks.